There we go.
Video. Well, okay, here we are.
Well, first of all, just give you each one of these here. You could just pass them around.
Sure.
Pass them around. That's a good way to do it. So this evening I'm going to talk about the marvelous heritage we have in this country. As I'm sure you all know, or you should know, we have the most marvelous heritage of any country in the world, in my opinion. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the Battle of Long Island. Has anybody ever heard of the Battle of Long Island? Sometimes it's called the Battle of Woodland Heights. And it was a very important battle in the Revolutionary War because the Revolutionary War was almost snuffed out. After Lexington and Concord, the American patriots set siege to Boston. And after about 8 or 9 months, I'm not exactly sure how long, they smuggled some cannons up to the top of the heights there, and they drove the British out of Boston, and the British took off to Canada, Quebec, I think. But after that happened, George Washington decided that the Port of New York was a very important port, and they wanted to make a stand and control the Port of New York. And so that's Battle of Long Island took place on August 27th, 1776, and it was the first battle after the Declaration of the Independence. And it was the largest battle involving troops in the entire Revolutionary War. Now, George Washington had 20,000 men. At least he had 20,000 men on paper. But about half those men were militia, state militia, and they were poorly trained, and they were ill-equipped. And even some of the Continental Army regulars, many of them had camp diseases and stuff. So it was a 20,000 man army on paper. And I'm going to read to you what George Washington spoke to his men before the battle and how they viewed it at that time. And he addressed the troops. He said, "The time is now near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their homes and farms are to be pillaged and destroyed. The fate of unborn millions now depend, under God, on the conduct and courage of this army. We have therefore to resolve to conquer or die. Our wives, children, and parents expect safety from us alone, and they have every reason to believe that heaven will crown with success so just a cause." So they were very serious, and they were risking everything and willing to die for what they thought was right. And again, that were 20,000 men. The British Army, on the other hand, in New York had 32,000 men. And 8,000 of those were Hessians, professional soldiers, supposed to be the best soldiers at the time. And they also had a Royal Navy, which had 10,000 sailors, 30 warships, and 1,200 guns. So the colonists were completely outmanned and outgunned. The British Army was commanded by General Howe, and his brother, Admiral Howe, was the commander of the Royal Navy. And originally George Washington put Nathaniel Greene in charge of the army, but he got sick. So he put in another famous general, Israel Putnam, to command the army at that time. And just as an aside, Israel Putnam was the ancestors of George Putnam. Some of you who live in Los Angeles may remember him. I think Israel Putnam said, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes." And although he was a good general, it wasn't that great of a choice because he was unfamiliar with the terrain on Long Island, which almost proved to be catastrophic for the revolution. Let me get my map here so I can read along with you. Thank you, ma'am. And if you look at the map, you'll see Long Island there, and then you'll see up above, you'll see the East River and the New York Bay. And you see what happened there was in Brooklyn Heights, the colonial army fortified their positions there, where you see where it says Alexander and Sullivan right there, and that's where those lines, those dark lines, that's where the colonial army was, and there were 4 passes there. Unfortunately, General Israel Putnam only knew about 3 of the passes. He wasn't aware of the 4th pass, and he left it unprotected. And there were British loyalists on the island too, and they told the British troops about it. And what happened was that they took advantage of that, and General Howe is called the Jamaica Pass. If you look there to the right, that big arrow, where it shows that's where the troops landed on Long Island there, and they went over there, and they part of the army was left in front of the colonials, and the rest of the army went up there through the pass, what's called the Jamaica Pass. You see there to the right, it says Jamaica. And Howe led 10,000 troops through the Jamaica Pass and completely surprised the colonial army and got behind them. And it was catastrophic. It was catastrophic. The casualties, here were the casualties that gives you an idea of how bad it was. The American casualties were 300 killed, 800 wounded, and 1,079 captured, whereas the British only had 64 killed versus 300 killed. The Americans, 293 wounded and 31 missing. So even though they had a much larger army, they suffered very lighter casualties. And unfortunately, the Americans were trapped. And they were in fact, that's how you might remember, that's how the American Revolution ended. At Yorktown, the Americans trapped the British up against the Chesapeake Bay, and there was no way for them to get out, and the British surrendered, because that was the principle of warfare back then. You were trapped with no escape. So the Americans were trapped in a defensive position. It was 2 miles across and 1 mile wide with their back to the river. If you see it there on the map there, you see where it says Putnam, 6,500 men, and you see the river there, it says East River. They were trapped there after the second day of battle, and they were about to be annihilated. Now, it would have been even worse, because if there was a British Navy out there, what would prevent the British Navy from just sailing up the river with their 30 ships, or however many it was, and the 1,200 cannon, and then just destroying the colonial army? And there was only one thing that prevented it. It was the winds and the storms at the time, but because this is the time of sailing ships, and their winds, they could not sail up the river to attack the colonials. Good luck, if you believe in good luck. So what happened was that George Washington decided to retreat at night, and that's kind of a very risky thing to do, because he was facing an army that had just defeated him, a victorious army. He didn't have a lot of ships or anything to evacuate the men, so it was a very risky proposition. Again, fortuitously, General Howe, for not reasons that aren't really clear, he had Washington defeated, but he did not pursue him. After that second, he just stayed there. And later on, he did tell the British Parliament, he said, well, this was a chance to defeat the American army on the cheap. By that he meant he wouldn't have to sacrifice his troops, they would just lay siege to them and starve them out. So that was the bleak situation that Washington faced. And they did decide to evacuate the army, and they would send out the call to all the small ships over there with all the rebels. And they started evacuating the army during the night. But unfortunately, this was in August, and August nights were not very long. And they had 20,000 men to evacuate across the river, and they couldn't get it all done before daylight. And half the army was left there at the mercy, about to be annihilated by the British Army. And what happened was very interesting. There's only one thing that prevented it. When the sun came up, a dense fog descended upon the East River. You could not see more than about 6 feet from you. And because of the dense fog, the Americans were able to continue loading the ships and going across the East River and get everybody out. And after they got everybody out, the fog lifted. And later in the morning, the British came to inspect the breastworks to see if the Americans, and they discovered that they'd all fled to safety. But by that time, it was too late, and there was nothing they could do. But had that not happened, that might have been the end of the American Revolution, and Washington was caught, he most certainly would have been hanged. Later on, General Washington had this to say about the whole matter. He wrote this in August 28, 1778, which is 2 years later, almost to the day. Undergoing the strangest vicissitudes that perhaps ever attended any one contest since the creation, the hand of Providence has been so conspicuous in all this, the course of the war, that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith. But it will be time enough for me to turn preacher when my present appointment ceases. So in summary, the American Revolution succeeded because there were good winds that prevented the British from sending up troops up the river, and mysterious fog came down and protected the retreat so that the army was saved. And that happened a lot of times during the war, similar things. In fact, one British general said, if I defeat George Washington many more times, we win or lose this war.
Thank you, General. I'll give you the proper promotion at this point. Thank you very much. The title was 5 days.
Pardon?
5 days was the title.
The Unseen Hand.
Oh, yes, man. Thank you. That's an ill wind that blows no good. Come on, let me hear. Interesting. Good. Thank you for the historical input. Our next speaker is Michael Wilson. His speech is the second from level 3 of his Pathways Path Innovative Planning. The purpose of this speech is to connect with the audience through storytelling. It's 5 to 7 minutes, and it's titled Oklahoma, Here I Come. Please welcome Michael Wilson.
Now we're going to skip ahead about 250 years. The year was 2007, and I had a